Hey friend, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here listening to another episode of the Pattern Design Circle podcast. Here we talk all about the ins and outs of designing knit and crochet patterns and running a business that makes it all possible. I'm Jessica, your host, knitting pattern designer, design mentor, and the friend in your ear. Can't wait to dive right in. The Pattern Design Circle podcast is sponsored by the Pattern Design Circle, a membership community for knit and crochet pattern designers that are feeling lost, lonely, or frustrated in their business. It connects you with a supportive community that's always eager to answer your questions and help you through the hard times. And there's loads of resources and activities specifically catered to business and designing. Sound like your jam? Check it out at snickerdoodleknits.com/design-circle. That's snickerdoodle, like the cookie, knits, knits.com/design-circle. All right, let's get into it. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Pattern Design Circle podcast. I'm so excited to be here in your ear once again with a lovely guest. Today we have Kim McBrien Evans with us, who is a yarn dyer, a designer, a teacher, all behind Indigo Dragonfly. Super excited to have you here, Kim.
It's great to see you again.
Yes, yes. Is there anything else you would like to add about who you are and what you do?
Um, I find it very difficult to say no to things. And so if something catches my interest, I do it. So I also sew, and I also do a lot of work and research into fit and size inclusivity and what true size inclusivity actually means. And so my whole life is a balance between the creative and the practical, and how to make the practical more creative and the creative more practical so that we all end up with clothing that fits us really well.
Yes, yes, I love that. And that's the topic we're talking about today, size inclusivity and what true inclusivity actually looks like. But I love that idea of, making the creative more practical and the practical more creative. I think probably all of us as creatives can relate to that in some point. Like it's fun to make really cool, amazing, creative things, but then it's
It
another thing
is.
when you want it to actually be able to wear it and to feel good in it.
Exactly. So you have to think about both those things. And as a designer, that's what I'm always doing. Somebody told me the other day that what I really should be designing instead of what I actually design is basics. And what they don't know is that every garment that I design is a basic in disguise. It's a
Mm,
basic that I've added some interesting stuff to, a more interesting stripe pattern, a really fancy collar, that sort of thing. But the actual basic garment is made to fit as many people as humanly possible. And
absolutely.
so what I try to tell people about my patterns is once you've knit a set in sleeve cardigan that I've designed, you can, and if it fits you well, you can use that pattern as a basis for any other set in sleeve cardigan
Yeah.
for the rest of all time without having to do more math and all of that sort of stuff. It's just a matter of, well, I know that this sweater fits me, but I like the cables in this pattern. So how do I make those two go together?
Yeah.
So it's really important.
So how did you get into this world of size inclusivity and fit and specifically in knitwear design?
Well, I'm a size 18, 5 foot tall woman. So clothing doesn't fit me ever. And that includes knitting patterns. And I started to notice things like if we choose a size the way that we are always told to choose a size in knitting patterns, then I would end up with set-in sleeves that were halfway down my arm because the garment was too big for my shoulders if it was made to fit my bust.
Mm.
And so I started to look into different ways of fitting my body better. And along the way, realize that other people need that information as well. And the second piece of it is when I was starting to knit sweaters way back in the 80s, when I was a teenager, none of the patterns I wanted to make were big enough to fit me. And at that point, I was like a size 9 or 10. So all the Rowan patterns wouldn't go up to my bust size. And that was really, really frustrating. So I also wanted to know how to figure out how to make those sweaters fit me, how to expand the sizing. And along the way, I've discovered that my body, not my height, but the circumferences of my body are actually the average, at least in North America. And that's really the only solid data that we have, is that the average size in North America is a size 16, 18. It's closer to an 18 now than when the study was done, because the study was done in 2016 and COVID happened and everybody got bigger during COVID. And even though that started to dial back a little bit, I used to joke about the COVID-19, not the virus, but the pound that you suddenly gained because you weren't leaving the house.
Mm. Yeah.
And it's amazing how much even just going to the grocery store, like our studio is next door, so we have to actively make a point of leaving the house. And then we couldn't for almost 2 years. And that made a difference as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just don't understand if this is the average size. Why is it so difficult for people who are size 18 and higher? If they are the majority, why can't we walk into a store and find a piece of clothing that we can get onto our body? Not a piece of clothing that fits. We're not even that ambitious. We just want to be able to get it on our bodies. And the last time I was able to do that, and I'm on the small end of the fat scale. I am not anywhere close to what the majority is. The last time I was able to walk into a store and try on even a dress and have it fit, or a t-shirt and have it fit, I can't even remember how long ago it was. It was, and definitely in the small town that I live in, and even the slightly larger towns that are within an hour's drive of me, that clothing doesn't exist. Maybe in big cities, but even in big cities, I went to New York in January for Vogue Knitting Live. And I went to some of the stores where I know that they carry larger sizes. When I got to those stores in New York City, they told me I would have to order my sizes in and pay to have them ordered in order to try them on. And that's just ridiculous. So I can't control all of that. What I can control is knitting patterns. I can make knitting patterns that will fit a broad range of body shapes and sizes. I can do that. I can control that. So that's where I've been focusing a lot of my energy in the last few years.
Yes, yes. So size inclusivity has become a more known topic in the knitting industry over the last few years.
Yes.
How do you feel like we're headed in the right direction?
I feel like there's more awareness of it.
Mm-hmm.
There's more awareness of the need to make bigger clothing and the need to make bigger sizes. I think that we could all be doing it better because there's a lack of understanding of what that means and how bodies work. Size inclusivity works best when you start with a sizing chart that has solid data, a solid representation of what bodies actually look like, an understanding of when it comes to women's bodies, because that's where I specialize. A lot of what I teach also applies to bodies of all genders, even men, because I know that the men need to hear the word men to understand that when I'm talking about all genders, I also mean them. So the techniques work for all genders, but the size charts don't. And that's because when we're talking about a typical male body, we're talking about a body that has broader shoulders. Now, that doesn't mean that women's bodies don't have broader shoulders. It just means that we need to approach it in a different way. Men's body size charts, that's a better way of putting it. Men's body size charts also tend to have hips that are smaller than their chest size.
Mm.
And again, that is not all men's bodies, but that's the typical sizing chart that we've seen. In women's sizing charts, the typical sizing chart that we see is smaller shoulders, a relatively average, not average size, basically a B cup pattern size, which we'll talk about in a minute, bust, a smaller waist, and slightly larger hips. But the reality of how bodies are shaped is entirely different because of the way standard sizing works. The sizing charts that we're looking at that are primarily being used as the standard for the knitting industry make the assumption that we all have a 2-inch difference between our upper torso measurement. So the circumference of your rib cage up above the bust tissue. Some call it a high bust. I like to say upper torso because I feel it's more inclusive. And the full chest or bust. Again, I use those interchangeably. If there's a 2-inch difference between all clothing that is built based on those standard sizing numbers, make the assumption that we all have a 2-inch difference. And I find that that's not necessarily true. And in my size chart research, I found that there's a smaller group at the bottom end of the scale where typically, on average, the bust size is a B cup. In the middle for from about a 40-inch upper torso, so this measurement, 40 inches, not this measurement, up to about a 50-inch upper torso. Everybody is a D cup, so they have a 4-inch difference between their upper torso and their full bust. And then above the 50-inch upper torso, it's a 6-inch difference. So if, as designers, we're not keeping that in mind and accounting for that, then it's more difficult for us to fit more bodies.
Yes.
The other assumption that those size charts make is that all of us up to a 48-inch bust have a 2-inch difference between our full chest and our hip size. So it assumes that our hips are always 2 inches larger until you get to 48, and then 48 and above, it assumes there is no difference in the circumference of your body between your bust and your hips. And when I say that in a classroom, they laugh and laugh and laugh. And it doesn't mean that there aren't people that have those proportions.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm saying is those are not the majority. As bodies get bigger, they don't necessarily get bigger in the same proportions as we would expect. And so we are headed in the right direction in that people are becoming aware of size inclusivity. But what I need to start seeing in knitting patterns and the way that patterns are being presented to the world is an understanding of the parts of the sweater that are not going to change at the same rate as the circumferences of your body. So it's okay to do every 2 inches for your upper torso, for your full chest, for your waist, for your hips, and have every size go up 2 inches once you've established what the middle of your size chart is. And I believe that it's important to start grading from the middle of your size chart. Or if you've got a really good size chart, you can do that and do it really well, and then grade up and down from that. But things like neck size and the proportion of a neckline to your shoulders, that does not change as rapidly. And if I see one more poor knitter wearing a flash dance yoke sweater, they get really creative about how they fix those. I've seen the ribbon through the neckline hold tight. I've seen the little keyhole where they take a little pin and they make a little keyhole. It's not really a keyhole because it does this to keep the sweater on their shoulders. Or even like clips to just bring it in. And all things like that, and things like the shoulder width not fitting in the larger sizes is usually because we think that we can just change the proportion of all the measurements by the same amount. Oh, and armholes. Armholes are horrible. As bodies get bigger, armholes change teeny tiny amounts in depth. In fact, I was at Rhinebeck in the fall and I was taking people's measurements. So I got to see all kinds of bodies over the course of 2 days. And I saw you there.
Yes.
All kinds of bodies, all shapes and sizes. And I can tell you that the smallest armhole depth that I measured was 6 inches. And the largest that I measured was 9.
Yes.
And that's when you're talking about a range from like a 30-inch bust to a 70-inch bust. The fact that there's only a 3-inch difference across the scale for armhole depth was really, really eye-opening.
Yeah.
So designers need to understand more about how bodies work. They need to understand more about where the numbers in their size chart come from.
Mm-hmm.
And can they rely on those numbers?
Mm-hmm.
And then they need to make a decision about what sort of body shape are they going to be designing for. And it's okay to design for a body shape that's like yours. But the more information you give your makers, and even if you give them access to the sizing chart you use to make that pattern, it's going to help them make better decisions about how to make your sweaters fit their bodies. But that neckline thing, we've got to fix that neckline thing because people just don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm. So I know that you have a size chart that you've developed. Where is that available?
That is available. It will be available on Indigo Dragonfly later today. I will make sure that I put a page up for it. If you do a search, if you can't find it readily on the front page, just do a search for designer resources. And I will have a page on my website that is just for designers that you can go to, and it will have that size chart. It will have a measuring guide for sweater knitters, and I'll put a few more things up there as well. See what else I can find.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So when we're talking about, all right, what is size inclusivity and what is true inclusivity, size inclusivity, basically, I think what I'm hearing is size inclusivity is broadly this idea of including a larger group of sizes, where true size inclusivity is really actually what do those bodies actually look like typically, or like on average? How do we actually design so that they fit? those bodies. Would you say, is that kind of the difference?
That's exactly the difference, is what are we thinking about when we're designing? Are we just trying to make our sweaters get on larger bodies, like be large enough in circumference to get onto larger bodies? Or do we actually want the shoulders to fit, the neckline to fit, the armhole to fit? All of those pieces of sweaters that make sweaters comfortable and make you feel good in them. Do you, in your design, for example, do you think about making sure in a drop shoulder that the armhole lands on the same place for every size? And where is that on every size? How do we figure out how to do that? I do it with drop shoulders by measuring from the shoulder width. So I have shoulder width as one of the measurements in my size chart that I use when I design. And I make necklines in percentage of the shoulder width, so that I know that it's going to sit nicely on that body and not fall off the shoulders. And then with drop shoulders, I make it either a percentage or an inch length wider than the shoulder width, so that on a body that is shaped exactly and sized exactly the way my sizing chart is, that's where it's going to sit on them. And by including the sizing chart, so either in the pattern or a link to it on my website, there is people have a greater possibility of figuring out how this sweater is going to fit their bodies. And if they want it to land in the armhole to land in the same spot, they figure out, well, where's my shoulder width in the size chart? Okay, it's my shoulder width. My shoulders are really narrow, so my shoulder width might be in a smaller size. And so what that's going to tell me is that by the time I get to the top of the sweater, if I'm working bottom up, I want to end up with the shoulder stitches of the size 3 instead of the size 5, for example. So what do I need to do in the armhole to get there? Usually it means I have to decrease some stitches. And I promise you, for makers, it's okay to do that. It's okay to move away from the pattern and give your body the number of stitches that it needs to to have clothing fit you the way that you want clothing to fit your body.
Yes.
Patterns are meant to, I always used to say this to my mom when I was growing up, patterns are meant to be broken. Recipes are meant to be broken, because she would flip through a recipe book and say, oh, I really want to make that roast chicken dish, but I really hate this ingredient. I'm like, so leave it out. Or put something in that you like. And she was like, I can't do that. It's a recipe. I can't add stitches. It's the pattern. Okay, Mom.
Yes. So there is, designers, and we've had this conversation before because we've
Yes.
talked in other areas, but designers can only go so far because a size chart
Exactly.
is still based on typical, average, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Your bodies, as you've already alluded to several times, bodies are all different. Most
Exactly.
bodies don't actually perfectly match up with a size chart for all of the measurements on it.
They don't. I don't, for example, I don't exactly fit into a single size in my own sizing chart, because I know that I have unusual proportions compared to my sizing chart, and that's okay, because I know what to do to fix that. I almost feel like designers need to let go of, so there's two parts of this. Designers need to think more inclusively of all bodies and how proportions of different bodies work, if they want to be considered truly size inclusive. And if they don't, then that's okay too, but own it, own up to it, and make it very clear that that's your stance as a designer.
Mhm.
But makers need to approach patterns as if they're not going to fit them straight out of the box. And I think that that's what people find so disappointing, is that they choose a size the way that they're told to choose a size in the pattern. And let's talk about that for a moment. Is there a more changeable part of our body as women than our bust? I don't care what size you are. I don't care if you're small, if you've got big boobs, it doesn't matter. You know, if we wear a different bra on a different day, date night bra, Saturday afternoon bra, right? Or no bra at all,
Mhm.
or. But then there's like hormonal changes and diet changes and seasonal changes. This is the most changeable part of our body. Why are we choosing a size for the entireness of our bodies based on the one part of us that changes the most?
Yeah.
So I advocate for choosing bony measurements. So this upper torso measurement, you're really measuring your rib cage. Even if you've got fat and muscle up here, and we do, it's not as much as the bust, which is all muscle and flesh and fat, and not at all stable, even a little bit. But this is more stable. And because your skeleton is unlikely to change size over your lifetime, you can count on the bony measurements. So this is a bony measurement. When you measure your hips, your largest hip size, your hip measurement is being supported by your pelvic bone. So that is also a bony measurement with some extra padding, but it's still way more stable than this.
Mhm.
So I feel like, and this is how I've had to approach patterns my entire life. If we approach patterns as if they're not going to fit us one size straight out of the box, then I think that that's life-changing for makers, and it takes some pressure off the designers. We have to not feel bad as designers that our pattern is not going to fit every person exactly as written in a single size, and move towards finding ways to support makers. And so one thing that I'm teaching a class for designers right now in size inclusive design, and the whole first session was basically, so here's what we need to take care of as designers, and here's what we need to let go of.
Mhm.
But if we want to help, what are resources we can send people to? What are classes we can send them to? What are blogs that we can send them to that will help them figure out how to mix and match the sizing to make the sweaters work for them? Because it is, I believe that it's a partnership between designer and maker. That finished sweater is a partnership. And if there's some give and take on either side, so designers are thinking more about how bodies actually change across their size range, and makers are walking in with the assumption that this sweater is not going to fit me if I choose a single size to make without looking at anything else, I think that we're closer to getting better fitting clothing for everybody.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it doesn't have to be hard. So one of the things people say to me is, well, I don't like math. I said, well, you're also a 6'2" woman knitting a pattern that was probably proportioned for somebody who is in the mid 5'7", 5'6" kind of category. So we already know that the lengths in the pattern aren't going to work for you. So figure out how many inches you need to add to the length and look for blank spots where you can add that space. Can you add it can you add like half an inch at the waist or an inch at the waist? Can you add a little bit longer to the hem? There are ways we can do this. And
Yeah.
there are ways that we can make it super simple, or we can make it really complex and finessed. But we can all have clothes that fit us better.
Yeah. And I think as designers, as a very fundamental, basic starting point is including the measurements and schematics in your designs. Like, how many garment patterns are there that only have the chest circumference? Nothing else.
I know. I know. This is one thing that we talked about in the design class, as inclusive design class, is they asked for, give us examples of what a good schematic and a bad schematic look like.
Mhm.
So I got a whole bunch and I just grabbed them from sweater patterns that exist right now. And so if you're giving, the more information you can give in a schematic, the easier you're making it for your makers to adjust the pattern to fit them well.
Yes.
And then we as a teacher, I need to teach people how to read that schematic and where to look for their measurements and what they can ignore. If they just want to make it fit their bust, for example, and they don't care about any other part of the pattern, what do they need to look for? And how does that change need to happen?
Yes, yes. And since we're here talking on a podcast for designers where we talk about business and all that
Yes,
stuff, if this is, if you love the math, if you love talking about sizing, if you really have a solid idea of how bodies work and you love this, this is totally an additional revenue stream you can add to your business that helps support your designs while informing
exactly.
your makers to be more confident and able to adjust and have better fitting clothing for themselves as well.
Absolutely. I've started doing a thing where once a year I release a pattern as a knit along, and working alongside the knit along, I run a class about that specific type of sweater construction using the pattern as our class example. And
Mhm.
we literally do things in the class like the first session of the class for this knit along was everybody just wanted to know that they had chosen the right size. So we went through, there were 25 people in the class, and what people say is that they find it, like, for me, that's really boring. And I'm thinking, is everybody okay? Like, is it really boring to listen to everybody else's numbers? But the
Mhm.
ones later on said it was really helpful because by the time we got to them, they could say to me, okay, I think I've got it. Tell me if I'm right. Here are my measurements. Here's the size I need for the top of the sweater. Here's the size I need for the bottom of the sweater. And I have to blend between a size 7 at the bottom to a size 5 at the top. And it's like, yes, that's it. And now the next class is, let's teach you how to do that
Mhm.
with a sweater pattern in front of you that you can use as guidance. And people have found it really, really helpful. So that's another thing that you can do. And it's just a virtual class. I think we're doing 3 sessions. And it's just some added value that you can add. And it's not a free class, by the way, designers. Your time is worth money.
Yeah.
Please start charging what your patterns are worth. And please stop, don't limit the amount of, think about the amount of time that you're spending supporting your knitters. If you do something organized like a class, charge for it.
Mhm.
Make it another revenue stream. Make it something that's going to work better for you.
Yes, yes. So that was one question actually I always think of when we talk about inclusive sizing because we talk about, well, first of all, designers, if they haven't done garments before, especially, they often feel very overwhelmed by, all right, now I have to figure out how to make everybody happy. I have to figure out how to really make this fit everyone. I think we've covered that now. But then the next thing is like,
Yes.
all right, I've put so much effort into this pattern. Um, how in the world am I ever, like, how is it ever going to be worth it financially, revenue wise? And I think that's then when pattern pricing comes in
Yes.
as a topic.
So I decided a couple of years ago that I was going to start charging the same amount for my patterns as I see men charging for theirs, male designers charging for theirs. And so I do. And I don't sell as many patterns, but so the sweater knit along that I do every year, last year in 2023, I decided I would make it half price for 2 weeks and give people a chance to grab it. And I got something like 150 150 sales. This year I got 80 sales, but I left my price at the original price. And if you wanted a discount, you could join my Patreon and get a discount code there, or join my mailing list and get a discount code there. So you could get it for half price or 25% off. You could, if you made that extra little bit of effort. But even though I made less sales, and that's just, I'm just talking about on Ravelry. I know that on my website it was comparable, and the same discounts apply in both places. But my sales, I made half the sales, but I made the same amount of money, even with the discounts, because I had raised my prices to match that. And understanding the amount of extra stuff in my patterns, I designed for 3 cup sizes because my customers have proven that they need that. And it's worth my while to add in bust shaping for 3 different cup sizes into a pattern. It's worth my while to do that in the pattern stage rather than having to support for free the 75 people that need to know how to do a bust start or how to add pattern bust shaping in this particular pattern. So it's a trade-off. Like how much extra value do you want to add to your patterns? Are you willing to charge what they're actually worth? So right now, my sweater patterns are $12. That's where my pricing is right now. And sometimes it feels frustrating because I'm not making as many sales, but the amount that I'm making is equivalent to doing that first week 50% off or 25% off or what have you. And people are getting a good deal of value out of my patterns. Often my patterns also include some modification information because, again, people will come to me and ask me to do that for them for free after they've bought the pattern. It's worth my while to add a worksheet in the back of the pattern and say to them, fill out the worksheet. If you would like me to then check the numbers that you've come up with, I'm happy to do that because that takes me 5 minutes. Helping me write it takes me a couple of hours sometimes.
Yeah. And as
So,
people work your patterns and realize like, hey, there's so much here, they
yeah,
don't think nearly as much about like it's no question of whether they're willing to pay for that sweater pattern or not.
yes, exactly. Exactly.
I've realized like my designs, I only have a couple of garments, but my designs in general, I love to have all the modifications and all of the options in my
Yes.
designs. And I like to be very thorough because I know what it was like to be a beginner knitter. I didn't have classes or anything, and how frustrating
Yes.
patterns could be. And I, still tend to forget how robust my patterns are compared to others until, another
Mm.
designer's like knitting it up and they're like, oh my goodness, there's so much in here. And then, it is your customers love you for it. They know what to
Yeah.
expect and they get excited because this isn't just you know, a one a one-time project or even a fits only if you fit this one certain category, but it becomes
Mhm.
a much bigger
A
resource to you.
resource.
Mhm.
Exactly. It becomes something that you can go back to and look at. Or again, as I said at the top of the show, it becomes that basic,
Mhm.
like all that information to do everything that you want to do with that one sweater. That becomes like a master pattern for you for all the sweaters in the future. And I think that that's a really valuable thing that we can be giving our knitters if it's something that we feel comfortable doing and if it's something that we feel we have the skill to do. And if we feel like we don't have the skill to do it, we can either go out, read everything that we can, take classes, and learn from other people who've been there. Hi. Uh, or we can send people to those places. I've had a couple of people tell me lately that they send it when in their patterns, they will send people to my boot camp class to learn about bust shaping.
Mhm.
Or they will send them to bums and bellies to learn about how to shape the lower body of the sweater if you don't magically fit into the size. And I think that any way that we can help link to each other and support each other in even those teeny tiny small ways, those teeny tiny seeds end up being huge growth for all of us. And
Mhm.
I do it as well. I think that it's important to add links to tutorials. I have zero desire to make yet another tutorial for a German short row or for um, the cable cast on, both of which I use a lot. So I find ones from independent designers that have already made them, and I use those links in my patterns.
Yeah.
Because again, I think it's really important to support each other as much as we possibly can.
Well, and we can get farther together. Like not everybody,
Yeah.
no, none of us is going to know everything and be able to provide all of the resources. So we can better support our customers when we are willing to promote each other. And
Yes.
it just helps us actually achieve, say inclusive sizing when we
Yep.
are not trying to just be in a silo and do it all ourselves.
Exactly. Or like a few years ago, I decided I'd had so many people come to my classes asking about fit for yoke sweaters, and I had to finally admit I'd never knit one.
Mhm.
And so, and I had completely ignored them because I thought that with narrow shoulders and a really big bust, that these were not sweaters that would work on my body. So why would I bother going out and learning about them? But so many people really needed that information that I took a year, and that's all I did is I studied and I knit yoke sweaters, trying to figure out how to make them fit all bodies,
Mhm.
right? Um, we can go out and we can learn those things. I've had thin designers tell me they don't understand my body, so they can't design for it. And I'm like, so if I were to say, I am not going to design for your size, what do you think would happen out there in the big bad knitting world? People would be enraged. How dare you skip the 32-inch size? How dare you only design for this size and up? Um, in fact, I had a tech editor once tell me that if I kept adding sizes, because for me, it's important to have not only have a broad size range, but to make sure that the size changes are reasonable
Mhm.
so that everybody has a chance, a fighting chance at getting a decent fit. And for that, for me, that means in the lower sizes up to a size 52, I have to do chest sizes every 2 inches. After 52, because when bodies get bigger, I've noticed that they get bigger more exponentially. So, for example, um, my brother, who is tall and thin, when his bicep gets bigger, it gets bigger by 1/4 of an inch at a time. When my bicep gets bigger as a size 18 person, it gets bigger like an inch at a time. So it will go straight from 16 to 17 with no stop in between. And then 17 to 18. And then back to 17, and then back to 16, and so on. So I feel pretty comfortable changing my chest sizes in the larger range to every 4 inches. And that allows me to get a broader range in a smaller number of sizes, but still fitting all the sizes the way that I want to.
Mm-hmm.
So that's landed me at 15 sizes. When I was at 10 sizes, my tech editor said, if you add one more size, I'm going to have to start charging you by the size. And I'm like, great. What size are you? That's the size I'm going to remove from my size chart. Because at that point, that tech editor would have been the smallest size of my size chart. And as soon as I said that, she saw it completely differently. Like she fully expected that if I was going to drop sizes, it would be from the top of my chart. I don't think she ever anticipated that I would start chopping from the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, so, and what I said to her was, I don't mind. In fact, I think you should charge me for the amount of time it takes you to tech edit my pattern. But do not tell me it's because I've added another size. Because if we're going to do this size inclusive thing, it has to come from all angles of the industry. It can't just be that little independent designer who is, I am never going to make a living on my pattern sales. It is not going to happen. It's really, really not. No matter how hard I try, no matter how much I spend on marketing, no matter how many podcasts I do, I am never going to make a living. Not even get rich. I'm never going to make a living on my pattern sales. So it's what else can we offer that we can use to create a supportive revenue stream for that design work?
Yes. So on that note, if folks want to learn more about inclusive sizing as a designer, how can
Yes,
they learn more from you?
I have an introduction to size inclusive design course that I run, and I'm currently in the process of setting up the next cohort. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a link to sign up for the waiting list for the next session. So if I think it's May when this is airing.
Yes.
So by that time, I think I'll be setting up for my fall class. So if you sign up for the waiting list, I keep an eye on the waiting list, and as soon as spots open up, I will send you an email and say, here you go. And what it is, it's an 8-week course with assignments. So there's practical assignments for every lesson, except one. There are 2 that I kind of roll together to give you a bit of a catch-up break in the middle that are practical assignments that apply to the lesson that we had that day. And we cover what inclusive sizing is and what it isn't. We cover sizing charts and how to put together your own and what numbers are out there and where those numbers are coming from, which is really, really enlightening. CYC chart. It's a bunch of editors sitting in a room deciding how big bodies are. There is no data that they're using. They are just determining amongst themselves what numbers they're going to put in the size chart this time. And they change that every 3 to 5 years, which was astounding to me. But that's the way it works, for example. We talk about grading, the different types of grading, and how whichever one you choose, it's okay. It doesn't make you not size inclusive to choose a different type of grading than another designer. Choose what makes sense for you for each design, and it might change from each design, from one design to another. And then we talk about what to do with this bust situation, what to do with, or how to design for larger bellies and larger bums, and what to think about in a pattern when in regards to those. We talk about necklines. We talk a little bit about sleeves. Tomorrow is sleeve day in our class. And basically, I leave one class open-ended so that we talk amongst ourselves about what is missing. What do you need as designers in this group? What do you feel like you're missing now? And so we dedicate that last class to all of that. And then we have a community group on Slack so that you can talk to other designers who are going through the same course or who have gone through it. And what I would like to do over time is be able to develop like a little collective of true size inclusive designers that support each other. Because I remember when I got back into knitting in the early 2000s, that's the way we did stuff. There were no influencers you had to pay to get your name out. There were no magazines telling me that they would promote my course if I gave them a cut of the fee. There was none of that. There was designers supporting designers, yarn dyers supporting other yarn dyers, and this industry, it was the rising tide that lifted all boats. And I would really like to develop that kind of community for designers.
Yes, that is.
As I know Jessica is doing as well.
Yes, I love that so much. All right, so well, all the links will be all in the description. Check out all of Kim's work there. Do you have any last words you want to share with designers who are maybe kind of just starting to get their feet wet now in inclusive sizing, whether they're feeling overwhelmed or confused, or what would you say to them?
It's okay to feel overwhelmed. It's a lot of stuff. You have a lot of information coming from a lot of different sources, which really boils down to everybody would like every designer to design a pattern that fits them perfectly.
Yes.
That does not work ever. People have tried fill in the blank forms. They've tried the sizing, spreadsheet sizing method, which again, still has the designer's proportions and brain behind it, which may not be how that person A wants their sweater to fit. We have tried custom fit knits, which is software that spits out a pattern in your size, in your gauge, but people still complain that they don't fit them the way they want them to fit. So let go of perfection. Let go of perfection. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. When you feel overwhelmed, write down, or if you're more of an oral learning person, speak into your phone all the things that are overwhelming you. And then from that list, take one thing that you're going to learn and perfect for one pattern. Start small and then add. Your first size inclusive pattern doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be a start. And learn from it. Take the criticism. Try not to take it personally. I am bad at that. Yes. Really, really, really bad. Like I have quit designing 75 times a year because one person out of 30 hates something about how I've written something. In fact, there's one person who sent me a whole email about the errors in my pattern, and it turned out all the errors in the pattern were just design aesthetics that she wanted to fix for her own taste. It's like, no, it's not a mistake.
Yes.
You made your own mods, and that's fantastic, and I fully applaud that. But we as designers can only do so much. And makers have to take it from the other side. So start small, start with what you can do. Start with what you understand and then choose one thing that you find challenging and go out and learn as much as you can about it so that you can add that to your toolbox. And the next pattern will be better. And the next one will be better than that, and so on.
I love that so much. My first garment design that I released, I had like just a few days before the pattern was supposed to release, another designer reached out to me and was like, "Hey, it looks like your arm is all messed up and that like it's pulling and all of this stuff in the photos." And I was like, okay, so I'm like frantically, like I'm like on mine, like I put a fair bit of ease there. So it's like it's not
Mm.
it fits really, I feel like it fits really nicely on me. That's the only photos she had seen were on me. But I reach out to my tech editor. I'm like, am I going bananas? Like I don't know what I'm doing. And then I reach out to the testers, and from a tech editor and all my testers, everybody was happy with it and didn't feel like felt like if anything it was the opposite of pulling there. And so I released the pattern. But there will be people who see
Yes.
things and will say things, and it can be really terrifying, especially when it is your first and you
Yeah.
aren't totally confident in what you're doing.
Can I tell you a how I almost didn't become a designer story?
Yes, yes, go ahead.
My most popular design, by far, it sold the most copies, it sold the most yarn for us, and it's still the project that's we sell out of at every show we go to. That project started at my local knit night when I was in Toronto, and I was playing around with this yarn that had really long color changes. And so I was trying to find ways to make it, if it was this kind of thing. I was playing with this kind of technique and trying to make like these little leaf shapes and see if that was a way to make the yarn pool in an attractive way. And I was really enjoying it and I was really into it. And I think I brought it like 3 weeks in a row, and knit night became the time when I sat quietly and I listened to the people around me because I was really shy and not quite ready to engage yet. And this other designer came up to me and said, "You need to stop working on that. It's stupid." To my face. Very well-known designer at the time. And that thing went in a drawer
Mhm.
for like 5 years until we had a club shipment that had yarn that was dyed that way, and I needed to come up with a pattern for it. And I thought, well, one person thought this was stupid, but I still really like it, so I'm going to keep going with it. And now it's my best selling by far pattern. And it's a shawl that's based on this kind of idea.
Yes, yes, I love it.
So
Thank you so
people
much
are
for sharing
stupid.
that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think I think we don't share those stories enough, you
Because
know?
there is people are, especially with the internet, I feel like, but like you said, that was a in-person to your face comment. Um,
Yeah.
there are people that are kind of nasty out there
Oh
that
yeah.
say things that really aren't called for at all. And
Yeah.
it can be really terrifying as a creative, as a business owner, all of the things. So I love that we're giving space, acknowledge that that exists. Um,
Yeah.
it is a
Hell,
thing.
it
But
happened to me with that pattern, a
yes.
picture of that pattern on Instagram last week. Someone who knit it was just so rude.
Mhm.
I'm not afraid of using the block button. I just thought, you know what? I don't clearly you don't like it, and I do. And I just felt that her comment was insulting and rude enough that I didn't want to hear from her again, and I just blocked her.
Mhm.
Sometimes I just mute people, but this time it was like, no, this is uncalled for.
Mhm.
This was a post about the creative process and where this came from, and you went out of your way to be nasty.
Mhm. Yes.
That takes a special kind of person. By the way, people are nastiest, I find, in January and February.
That makes a lot of
in North
sense,
America.
actually.
Right?
Oh,
Right? We
goodness.
used to be able to count on getting all the emails from people that were angry about a single mill knot in their yarn. They all come in January.
Oh, yes. So continue to focus on your creativity. Continue to focus on
Exactly.
what you really love and doing what you can and making the little difference in the small things because honestly, as humans, that's all we can do. So,
That's it. And we are human after all. We are not superhuman designer people. We can only do what we can do. We can, I mean, I say that my entire business plan is world domination. What I really mean is I just want to be as kind and as helpful to as many people as I can, while understanding that I am one of those people. And
yeah,
it's okay to feel overwhelmed and just put that aside until you feel like you've got it solved, or pare down your expectations to something that's manageable.
100%. Thank you
Yep.
so much, Kim, for
Oh, you're
joining
welcome.
us, for everything that you've shared on inclusive sizing, but also all these other gems that you've dropped. It's
Mm,
absolutely lovely to chat with you.
you too.
Hello, real quick from Jessica in the future. I also wanted to remind you that if you are a Pattern Design Circle member inside of the membership, you have access to our guest discussions that we've had in the past, which includes a discussion with Kim all on inclusive sizing. So we talked about what we talked about here on this episode, plus we go a bit deeper into specifics of selecting a sizing chart, ensuring best fit, specific kind of recommendations on fit and answers to all of the designers' questions from inside the membership, as well as some additional resources that Kim recommended. So if you're a member of Pattern Design Circle, remember you have that resource available to you as well. And if you are thinking about joining as a member, you will have access to all of the guests' recordings as soon as you join. So just wanted to remind you that that's there. Thanks again so much for joining us for this podcast episode. Wow, thanks so much for listening to this episode. If you found it valuable, please share the podcast with a designer friend. And if you have a minute, leave a review. It's so helpful for me and means the world to me. Chat soon.